Hi, welcome everyone. This is our presentation on fair, equitable, and reliable grading and gradebook practices. We're going to get into lengthy introductions in a second, but my name is Michon Otuafi. Melissa Carson is presenting with me. We wanted to give you an opportunity right now to see our email addresses because we would be more than happy if you would like to contact us in any way. There are both of our addresses. So if you want to take your phone and take a picture of this slide before we do our longer introductions, we'd be more than happy later to answer any of your questions via email. They're right there at the bottom. So we just wanted to start with a little bit of information about ourselves. Like I said, my name is Michon Otuafi, and I am a teacher at Galena High School here in Reno, Nevada. I've been teaching English for the past 14 years, and I've also been the department chair for the last 9. I'm a nationally board certified teacher, and I work with other teachers who are pursuing their board certification. I help and provide them feedback. And with the last 2 years or so, I've been doing some professional development sessions with my own school, as well as other schools, and we've been presenting on grade books. But I have to say that none of this would be possible without my good friend, Melissa, because years ago, I would say about 5 or so, Melissa came into the lunchroom, the teacher's lunchroom, and said to me, I don't think that we should penalize kids for late work. And my jaw dropped to the ground because I'm like, what are you talking about? But it was a real wake-up call for me. So I will give her credit for that. And ever since then, she and I have been working together, just absolutely devouring literature and all sorts of research so that we can really understand what fairness and equity means in grading. So I have her to thank for getting me involved in this whole process. So Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Melissa Carson. I was a Spanish teacher for about 12 years in the classroom. And in the last 5 years, I've been the World Languages Program Facilitator for Washoe County School District here in Reno, Nevada. And I will say that Michon and I taught next door to each other for years and developed a really strong friendship, you know, from when we were covering for each other, when we were out with babies and the whole gamut of our beginning to when I left the classroom educational experience. But if it wasn't for her, I would not have come this far. I probably would still be stuck in the wondering stage instead of the research stage. So thank you, Michon, for being my encourager, my teacher.
Believe me, there have been times where our conversations just go back and forth because this stuff is hard to wrap your head around initially. And so we want you to know that this is something that we've been working on for years and trying to figure out for years. So today, if you feel overwhelmed at all, we totally understand, but that's why we want you to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy, like I said, to answer any emails. So let's get right into it.
So as we begin today, we want to start with a few reflective questions. They'll be short and simple, but hopefully they'll make you stretch and really think about your web of beliefs concerning grading in your classroom. We highly encourage you to get a piece of paper or use your phone, write your answers down somewhere, because we're going to revisit this at the end of today's presentation and just see if anything changed for you, if your beliefs have shifted, if you've stretched, if you're uncomfortable, just kind of walk you through the same process where we started. So our first 3 questions. What factors do you believe should be reflected in a student's academic grade? We're not talking citizenship, but specifically academic. And here's a few options to get you started. Summative assessments, formative assessments, homework as a completion grade only. That means that you're not really checking the answers, but just checking to see it's been completed. Behavior and/or attitude, participation, preparedness, timeliness, group work, student notebook or binder, effort, work habit and neatness, attendance or tardiness. If we miss something, if there's something else you want to add to your list, please feel free to do it, but take a second to really consider the question and reflect. Okay, we're going to move on to question number 2 now.
The second question asks about the purpose. So what purposes do you believe grades serve? So the first thing we want you to think about is, do you believe that the purpose is to inform all stakeholders about student behavior? And remember, when we're talking about stakeholders, we're talking about everyone, the students, the parents, the counselors, the registrar, everyone involved in that child's education. The second one we were thinking about is it to inform all stakeholders about students' level of mastery of content standards? And the third option here is to motivate students to do better in school. So on that piece of paper, on your phone, wherever you're choosing to write these notes, we're asking you to really reflect upon, what do you believe the purpose is, and the grades, what purpose do you believe the grades serve? So we're going to give you some time there to also think about that. And then we're going to move on to the third one.
And just real fast, do you believe your grades are fair, equitable, and reliable? You knew this question was coming based on the title of our presentation. And remember, equity is not the same as equality. Equitable means giving people what they need instead of giving every person the same thing.
As you answer that question too, and I always ask myself, it's easy to say yes, because you truly want to believe that about yourself, for sure. That's how I feel. But really think about each of those words. Do I really think my grades are fair? And reflect on, what evidence would I even have to show that? Do I really believe they're reliable? What evidence do I have? So yes, we obviously want you to think about those words, but also, do you have concrete evidence to kind of back that up? That's a good way to think of it too. So here are our objectives for today. We wouldn't be teachers, right, if we didn't have objectives. So our objectives today, we have three main ones. And the first one is, we would really love if you left with a better understanding of what a fair, equitable, and we have reliable/accurate grade book, what that looks like. We also want this to be a really big reflective piece. I know that I feel like I've been reflecting for the past 5 years, and we know as educators, that's a really good thing to do. So we want you to reflect upon your own grading and your own gradebook practices. And then finally, our hope is that you're going to leave here with ideas and resources to actually make changes to your own grading practices and gradebooks, if you desire to do so. Something that Melissa and I have run into before is, we felt like we've been to trainings and there's like really great ideas, but there's no pathway. And so our goal today is to at least give you the beginning to that pathway, and we hope we can serve that purpose.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick look at snapshots from the year 1955 and 2021 of elementary classrooms. We're going to juxtapose the two. What are the differences? What are the similarities? What kind of classroom would you like to be a part of? What kind of classroom, which classroom looks like your classroom? You can see that in 1955, students were sitting in rows, versus in 2021, students are sitting in groups. Now, I know that the 1955 picture is only a snapshot, but notice that the students are sitting quietly. They're being compliant. Versus 2021, the students are being collaborative. They're interacting with each other. The classrooms look diverse. The teacher looks diverse. What jobs are we training students to fill in 1955 versus what jobs are we training students to fill in 2021? And what really comes into play here is considering the 21st century learning standards. Because in actuality, you may be training students for a future in which their job doesn't yet exist. So what skills are extremely important that you should be including in your classroom? Now, something to consider is that education has changed vastly from 1955 to 2021, looking at methodology, pedagogy, standards. But what hasn't changed is the gradebook. Why do you think that is?
Other things that we should look at, this slide has two different sides to it. The first one is what factors are actually included in grades. So this is what we've known to be pretty much for when we went to school and some of our practices now. So go ahead and look at that list on the left. We have things like achievement. We do have things like behavior and attitude. We've had questions before about family status, and we're talking about socioeconomic status, those types of things. Ability, promptness, extra credit, compliance. So those are all things that are actually included in grades. But on the right-hand side, we have what should grades tell us about students. And if you notice, looking on the right, we have some differences here. What things they know and can do, whether they have improved during the marking period, what their strengths are and the things they need to work on, whether they can solve real-world problems, what level their work is at, whether they're ready to move on, whether they've reached a standard, and finally, how well they can apply what they know. What we're seeing here is what's interesting is on the right-hand side, these are all the things that grades should tell us. But if we have things like that are on the left-hand side, such as behavior and attitude, that are also combined with the things on the right-hand side, now our grades really aren't that accurate. Because if we're including things like, probably unintentionally, obviously, things like family status into the academic side of the grade book, that has an impact on the accuracy and reliability of our grade books, because now we're including things that aren't related to the standards or their performance. So our goal really is to kind of shift our thinking to the right side and really think about these are the ideas of what our grades should tell us about students. Thinking about standard-based types of things, thinking about what their level of their work is at, and really pushing them in order to fulfill what they need to know to be proficient.
Michon, just real fast, I want to mention, I saw a list similar to this in the Grading for Equity book by Joe Feldman. And one of the things, as I was considering and in the reflective state early on, that I'm looking for the word here, the family status, that didn't register with me right away, because my thought initially was there's no way that I'm ever taking into consideration family status. How is that playing into the grade book at all? But I'll be the first to admit that I was that teacher that gave extra credit for Kleenex.
Yes.
And that's what Joe Feldman was talking about when he talks about family's economic status.
Right.
Is I'm taking away an opportunity for a student to earn extra credit based on whether or not the family could afford to bring in tissue or glue sticks or whatever, because we as educators don't want to pay for that ourselves. And yet our schools can't always pay for that. So we put the onus on families, and that's not fair. And you might argue and say, yeah, but it's 5 points extra credit. It doesn't make a difference in the first place. It does make a difference to the mental status of your student. They already feel like they're starting behind when they can't even bring in a box of tissue.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that, because you're not alone there. There were times where I would say for extra credit, you can, go to a play at the university and write a summary, a review of it. And looking back on that now, that is the same exact thing, because I am now saying that if you can't afford or you don't have transportation to get there to the play, you don't have that opportunity. So I agree with you. At first, you're thinking, I don't do any of those things. Why would I ever consider family status and gradings? But and that's why I said it's unintentional, and we are both guilty of it for sure. So we own that now, and we're trying to make it more equitable and fair. So thank you for bringing that up, Melissa.
Yeah, talking about owning it, right? Michon still is a department chair. And I once upon a time was a department chair with her. And we brought this discussion into our department meetings, and it's difficult. It's a tough conversation. So then you dig into, why is it difficult for people to talk about this? I mean, we grew up hearing that there are 3 things you don't talk about with, friends, and money, politics, religion, right? But add to grades and your grade book now,
Our teacher friends, yeah.
right? People become possessive over it. And so according to a lot of the books we read, it's that web of beliefs. Teachers feel the need to defend what they think is right. And we're not saying that anybody is right or wrong. We are going to simply state the research and the evidence today, and let you make the decisions for yourself. So we truly ask that you come to our presentation without any sort of preconceived notion or bias. No agreements necessary, just keep an open mind. But what makes it difficult is that each of us have a web of beliefs about students and grading that is directly in alignment with our own morals, standards, and experiences. If we come to find out that we have not been fair and are equitable in our grading practices, we may feel that we have perpetuated inequities in our classrooms and schools for years without realizing it. I truly believe in our profession, teachers go into education because they love kids. They want to make a difference. They want to do better and be better. And so this idea that you may not have done right by your students, you need to get rid of that and just open yourself up to a new idea.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were reading that, I even kind of wince a little bit, because that is your gut reaction. But Melissa's right. It's like, okay, but if I know now that I can help these students by being more fair and equitable, then I can do so. But I totally agree with you. It's in the past. So Melissa did an amazing job of creating an annotated bibliography. We would just feed each other resources, and she organized it for you. And this is a big takeaway we're hoping that you can have. So these are all, if you go ahead and put your phone up to the screen, if you have an iPhone, you can open up the camera. And if you just put it up to the screen and scan this QR code, it's going to direct you to an annotated bibliography that we've created. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and share it with you so you can see it live. So we've created this. It's just an annotated bibliography. It is organized. The first part is articles. And then if you scroll down, you should see books. And then after books, you should see websites. So what we're trying to do, and by the way, this is a working document, so we're continuing to add things to this, but these are our articles and books and websites that we have felt are really helpful. Because I don't know about you, but if you research this right now, so many things come up, and I think it's overwhelming for teachers. And so what we want to do is, we've done a lot of the hard work for you, and happy to do so. We have all the different articles, and with the annotated bibliography obviously comes the summary, and then you can directly go to that article by accessing these links. And so our thought on this is that when you're thinking, if you are a department chair or you're a professional development coordinator, and you're thinking, okay, I really need kind of a step-by-step thing to talk about fair and accurate grading, we hope you can come to this resource and say, okay, great. Here is an article on 6 steps towards fair and accurate grading. So we encourage you to please access this annotated bibliography to help you in your journey in becoming more aware of different things that you could do inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. Was there anything you wanted to add about this annotated bibliography that I didn't cover?
No, except for the fact that you did a bunch of the work too.
It was, well, you were great at organizing it. So I do thank you for that. We're going to go back to the PowerPoint, and we're just going to give you a couple more seconds to make sure, if you didn't feel like you had enough time to scan this QR code. Once again, if you have an iPhone, an iPad, you can easily open up the camera there, scan it, and it will direct you towards that. This is part of the pathway that I talked about before. We're hoping something like this helps you on your journey.
And feel free to email us, and we'll send it to the link as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our presentation is fair, equitable, and reliable. So what does that look like? I will tell you that a lot of the information in the next few slides, when we really dig into fair, equitable, and reliable, has been synthesized from Ken O'Connor's book, The 15 Fixes for a Broken Gradebook. So this portion is looking specifically at fair. We encourage you to not use information from formative assessments and practice to determine grades. Use only the summative assessment. This is tricky, right? Because the majority of the grades that go in the gradebook are formative assessment. But formative assessment should be informing teachers on student progress, on student learning. Teachers should not be holding students accountable for not knowing the information or penalizing them for being wrong. Because without making mistakes, there is no learning. So we encourage the idea of process versus product, formative versus summative. We're going to show you an example of a world language teacher's gradebook at the end, and you can see the difference in what it looks like having process versus product in your gradebook. Second, don't summarize the evidence accumulated over time when learning is developmental and will grow with time and repeated opportunities. In those instances, emphasize more recent achievement. I have to tell you, this was the biggest game changer for my set of students, because in my classroom, especially when you think about ACTFL's inverted triangle, when it comes to the proficiency, right? You move through the novice portion of the pyramid a lot faster than when you get to the intermediate. So that means for my first level students, they may not have always been able to tell you about their name, age, where they're from, distinguishing attributes of their life in the first unit. But I promise you, by the time we got to December, they were able to do so. So if they're now able to accomplish the standard, why should I not give them the credit deserving for accomplishing that standard? It motivated my students to work harder, to keep up with class, to keep going, to look at the rubrics, to stay engaged, because they know what their grade was on the Unit 1 assessment may not always be what their ending grade would be at the end of the semester. Because I don't know if this is the right place to talk about this, Michon, but research, and I was personally surprised by this, but Thomas Guskey cites research that says a low grade does not motivate students to do better. So when a student gets a low grade, how do you motivate them to stay engaged in class? And this right here was what made all the difference for me. Okay, the third one, don't leave students out of the grading process. Involve students. They can and should play key roles in assessment and grading that promotes achievement. Don't include group scores and grades. Use only individual achievement evidence. That one's a big one. Especially when we talk about collaborative learning and 21st century skills, but there is a way to hold students accountable for their own learning and not for the group's learning. And then finally, align your gradebook with course-alike colleagues, guaranteeing that students have a similar grading experience when it comes to summative assessments. Use rubric and other grading practices to ensure fairness. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. In our school district, the messaging from on high in central office is that it should not depend, student success, I should say, should not depend on which teacher the student receives. Learning should be equitable for all students, accessible for all students. One way of ensuring that is a common gradebook with common assessments.
And if I could just comment on that, I think when we initially say that, people all of a sudden kind of panic and say, but what about my autonomy? And what we want to tell you about that is you don't get, it's not like you're going to lose the freedom of getting your kids there the way you would like to get them there. What happens in your classroom daily is up to you. And how you get your kids to that common summative assessment is up to you. So you don't lose autonomy. I think that's one of the number one kind of fears about this whole idea about collaborating to have the same summative assessments is, well, what about my autonomy? Because we want to protect that. And we understand that as teachers 100%. So we want you to feel a little bit of relief and understanding that just because you have a summative assessment doesn't mean that you have lost freedom of what you do in your classroom every single day. And I think that's been a big a fear of a lot of teachers. And if you don't mind, Melissa, I did want to go back to the don't include group scores and grades, because everyone goes, well, then how do you do that? If you 21st century learning is all about collaboration. Just from my own experience, the kids collaborate and work together, but the product is individual. So when they turn in something, it's not like they're all turning in one product. It's we collaborate and we work together and we share our ideas, but the individual part of it is at the end when the product is individually turned in. So it's not a group project, it's group collaboration, like think alouds working together. And in the end, they get an individual grade because they have an individual product. So it is 100% possible to still do group work without taking group scores. And I'm hoping that makes sense. Does that make sense, Melissa?
It does. And I know, sometimes, especially in the CTE world, I work with CTE teachers and they do have a group product, but they've found a way to make sure that each individual's grade is reflective of that individual's knowledge and participation with the group in the ultimate product.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to the idea of equitable. So the very first thing is don't give points for extra credit or use bonus points. Seek only evidence of that more work has resulted in a higher level of achievement. We went over this just a little bit a couple of slides ago, but I do want to talk a little bit more. Yeah, we're definitely saying no extra credit for Kleenex, no extra credit for attending events, but we're not saying no extra credit at all. The only time the extra credit could be offered would be to challenge students who are already exceeding standards. And so therefore you're challenging them with a standard-based type of summative or something in that sense. But get away from giving extra credit points for things that we know if one student can't afford it, it is not fair for another student to be able to take advantage of that. And none of that is related to learning. And that was always a hard thing for me with adopting all of this. I just kept having to ask myself the question of, is this related to learning and standards, or am I grading based upon behavior, attitude, participation types of things? And so we'll get more into that too in this next one on how you can kind of separate the two, because this one says, and I know this is a hard one, so I'm probably getting booed as I read this, don't reduce marks on work submitted late. Take that in for a second and really think of that. And it says provide support for the learner. I will tell you this was hard for me in the beginning, because I'm like, well, wait a minute, how are we going to hold them accountable? And how are we going to teach them about diligence and turning in things on time? But no one said these things aren't important. They just can't fall on the academic side. And here's why. If I'm grading an essay and it's out of 10 points, I've got a beautiful rubric that aligns with all this, right? And the student turns in work late, and I automatically give it a 50%. What I'm saying is that student isn't even approaching the standards of writing. When that isn't true, because later when I graded it, they actually were exceeding standards and received 100%. So if I hold them accountable by reducing marks on their work submitted late on the academic side, now my gradebook once again is not reliable. It's not accurate. So what do you have to do? You still can hold them accountable. So on the citizenship side, and schools have done this differently, you have to hold them accountable there. So for example, we have a citizenship gradebook, and it is, there's two things. There's one that has like behavior/attitude, okay? And then there's the other side about preparedness. And that's how grades are given about, in regards to citizenship, we take, if they submit work late, it goes on that side instead of the academic side. We've seen different setups. I'm hoping our district at some point adopts the same citizenship rubric across the entire district. I've seen, Melissa and I've talked a lot about a college and career type of citizenship rubric that we think would be great, still holding kids accountable. But a lot of these things are still being created. But just sit on that and think of that. Could you, I know it's hard, you get a late paper, it's okay. You're not going to mark it late, but you are going to go ahead and grade it for what it is. So think about that for a while. That one might be a hard one. The next one, oh, I got some hard slide here. Don't punish academic dishonesty with reduced grades. Apply other consequences and reassess to determine actual level of achievement. You're probably thinking we're out of our minds. But hey, I'm an English teacher, okay? So I know we all know about plagiarism as English teachers, but I will tell you this. When I give a student a 0 for plagiarism, what am I really teaching them? And what am I really saying? That, hey, I don't want you to do the assignment. Nothing is worse to a teenager than saying, hey, you know what? You've plagiarized. Let me explain to you what plagiarism is. And by the way, you're going to redo this entire assignment. Okay. So for them having to redo that assignment, number one, they're learning. Number two, they're probably miserable, but we really want them to learn. So the goal is, no, we're not going to punish you on the academic side by giving you a 0. But what we are going to do is on the citizenship side, you either have, B or C, depends on what your school has decided. But what teenagers don't like is loss of freedom. You also are going to have a detention at lunchtime. And that sometimes is a bigger deal. We also hold them accountable by asking them to call their parents. It's pretty hard for a student to call their parents to let them know, I've plagiarized my entire English paper. So those are ways that we can still hold them accountable, but we still want them to do the work. We want them to learn. That's why we're here. Finally, don't consider attendance in grade determination. Report absences separately. This is a little bit of a difficult one. I know where we are from, we don't hold kids accountable in regards to, or excuse me, we don't consider attendance in the grade determination. That was decided as a across the district thing, but that really is important, especially with this last year and a half of what we've all had to deal with. This is a really touchy subject. So that's something to think about also. Anything did you want to add?
I did, because
okay, please do.
Yeah, the academic dishonesty, the plagiarism, that's a big one in world languages because students tend to use Google Translator and they don't think that they are actually cheating or plagiarizing at that point. But as a district department for world languages, it's in our policy book. Using a translator for your work is academic dishonesty. And when I explained that to my students and I said, I won't accept it, and you'll have to either sit in class or give up your lunch and you'll rewrite the paper in front of me. That's a big one because, and honestly, it stopped with other proficiency indicators, rubrics and things like that. The plagiarism did stop in our department.
Yep. And with that being said, a lot of these summatives, I mean, they should be occurring in class in front of you. I think that helps too. They've got to.
Yeah, it does change things when students are not getting penalized for mistakes. They're not getting penalized in the practice phase. Yep. Then it tends to click in their mind like, this is just practice. I can make mistakes and I'll get feedback on how to do better. It does change things. You're right.
It does. And the whole environment. I mean, the thing about when I go back to the idea of work submitted late, when a kid comes to me and says, hey, can I submit this late? That gives me an opportunity to build a relationship with that kid too. Because I can say to them, hey, by the way, why is your work late? Let's talk about that. And so then I'm also building a positive relationship with that student because I care about you. I want to know why you're turning in things late. Now, I think other people in their mind right now are thinking, oh my gosh, then everyone's going to turn something in late. We don't broadcast that. We don't say, guys, hey, I'm going to take everything late. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be penalized. You don't broadcast that, but you do have conversations with kids to make them feel more comfortable in your classroom.
Okay. The next thing that we're going to talk about is, and Michon, I'm so sorry. I've lost my place on my notes. Here we go. What does a reliable gradebook look like? And I'm sorry, my Zoom bar was in the way of the title, so I couldn't quite see. Talking about reliability. Again, while we're going through these lists, think of evidence in your own gradebook. And I'm going to take just a couple, and Michon's going to take a couple, and we'll get through this list. The first is don't organize grading records by assessment methods or simply summarize into a single grade. Organize and report evidence by standards and learning goals. This is important because, especially if you're a parent and you're trying to understand your child's grade and everything is reported in one single grade, you understand what we mean when we say don't organize grading records by assessment methods, right? You're trying to make the grade book understandable for all stakeholders. Don't assign grade using inappropriate or unclear performance standards. Provide clear descriptions and achievement expectations. In world languages, in our department as a whole across the district, we picked 3 essential standards that our grade books are based around, and those essential standards are the 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. So that's what we base everything off of, because we can talk about culture, community, and connections through communication. Next, don't assign grades based on student achievement compared to other students. Compare each student's performance to a preset standards.
So the other ones we wanted to talk about was don't rely on evidence gathered using assessments that fail to meet standards of quality. Rely on quality assessments. And you know what? Once again, this comes back to collaboration. You've got to collaborate, go back and look at the assessments that you have and really think about, do these questions align with what I'm supposed to be assessing? That is difficult, but it is well worth it.
You know,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is just the one that has, and we're living it now in my department. It's resonating with me because of the fact that we're working on developing common final assessments district-wide. And so this has been tricky because we still have teachers who are giving multiple choice tests. And I know the argument that, well, AP has a multiple choice section, but I really, really, really would challenge world language teachers to sit down with your world readiness standards and look and see every single standard is a production standard. What are your students producing if you're not using some sort of performance or proficiency assessments like integrated performance assessments or IPAs?
Thank you for adding that. I think we've talked about this already, but just reinforcing this, I mean, it is so important. Don't include those student behaviors. Remember, they go on the citizenship side of the grade book. And finally, don't include zeros in grade determination when evidence is missing or as punishment. Use alternative such as reassessment to determine achievement, or use the I for incomplete or insufficient evidence. What that means is if the student doesn't complete the work, if you assign an incomplete, basically what you're saying is there wasn't any evidence there to actually give a grade. And by assigning the incomplete, that means the student needs to do the work. And it's difficult, and you're probably thinking this is more work for me, but it isn't, because you have to also remember that you're doing less work with the formative stuff within the grade book, right? You're not going to assess every single tiny or grade every single tiny formative. So there is wiggle room here so you don't feel completely stressed. I know that was been a complaint with some of the teachers who we've been doing professional development, but I'm telling you, I've made this switch and I don't feel like I'm doing more work than I was. But I will tell you this, much better relationships with my students. Absolutely.
Well, and I don't know if you want to speak further to the evidence behind that, but when you think of the 0 to 100 scale, 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, and so on. So each grade is worth 10% except the F. The F is worth 60%. So it's really hard for a student to recover from a 0 because the 0 is the 60% differential there. So that's the main reason behind that. Do you want to add to that, Michon?
No, that's perfectly said. Totally clear. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a snapshot, an image of one of the world language teachers in our school district that has moved to a standard-based grading system. So you can see she has 3 categories that count towards the final grade plus the category of final exam. And final exam is a mandate by the district, right? But she has interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, the standards. Also, each of those standards has a proficiency rubric aligned to what performance should look like, what proficiency looks like in each one of those standards. And then you can see that she has an interpretive process, interpersonal process, presentational process. Those three categories weight 0. They do not go towards the final grade. They do not count towards the final grade. Here's why this is important. One of the misnomers about standard-based grading is that you only grade the summative assessment. That's not true. You still need to give consistent feedback to students on where they're measuring when it comes to the standard. Feedback is essential. That's part of the process. That's part of the practice. That's part of making mistakes, right? Students get the feedback. If you're wondering about what kind of feedback is great in a world language classroom, I highly recommend the book Enacting the Work of Language Instruction, High Leverage Teaching Practices by Eileen Gleason and Richard Donato. Because right there, that tells you how to implement feedback in a positive way in the classroom. And then you can use that into your grade book as well. But you can see with this particular teacher, now the teacher can also, by having a process versus product, the teacher can see how the student's practice is aligning with their ultimate grade. You can also see that maybe I can point out the student at the very bottom of the list. In the process category, thanks, Michon, I appreciate your cursor. The student at the bottom, his process grade is a 55%, but his product grade is an 89%. This student is not being held accountable for homework that didn't come in, or grades that did come in late, or absenteeism, because he's still showing up and he's still producing and he's still meeting the standard, but that compliance isn't measured in the academic grade anymore. This also helps bring clarity in parent-teacher conferences when parents want to know, like, why is my student not earning A's? Or if they're practicing and getting 80%, why are they not doing that well on the actual performance, the product grade? Well, that's a whole set of discussion points as well. And that could speak to test anxiety, trauma that's occurred, all sorts of things from minute to big issues.
Yep, agreed. I think that this way, like you were saying, it really helps with parent-teacher conferences. So now we're getting to the end here and we are running out of time. So what we'd like you to do is we want you to reflect. So we asked 3 questions at the very beginning of this presentation. And what we'd like you to do is look now at your answers and think about this. Did your answers change at all from the beginning of this presentation to the end? These were the 3 questions we already asked you. What factors do you believe should be reflected in a student's academic grade? What purposes do you believe grades serve? And finally, do you believe your grades are fair, equitable, and reliable? And our job is just to ask for you to reflect upon that. Maybe they didn't change, maybe they have, but we do want you to think of those things. So just take a minute to, we don't have time for a minute, but maybe take a few seconds to look at what you said before. And we're hoping that maybe some of the things we said have prompted you to reflect upon your previous answers. What we want to end with here, and we have to give credit where credit is due, is grading from the inside out. Loved it, right? 2 thumbs up, was so good. We're such nerds and I love it. We want you to find your true north. So we took this from this. So the true north, according to the Earth's axis, it sits at the geographic North Pole. And so unlike magnetic north, which transforms over time due to magnetic changes in the Earth's core, as well as local magnetic variances, true north remains constant. So while much about the Earth constantly changes, true north remains stable and unaffected as a geographic focal point. And you're probably thinking, why are you telling me this? Well, here's why. We are challenging you to define your true north when it comes to grading practices. So we know there are some definitive non-negotiable grading fundamentals, and most decisions about when to grade and how to grade and what to grade, they're going to vary from teacher to teacher. But if you as a department can come up and establish what your true north is for your entire department. What do you believe in when it comes to grading? If you can establish that, that's going to increase the likelihood that those grading practices remain consistent and aligned between all of you within that department, and maybe even at that school. That would be an awesome goal to have. So we challenge you to come up with your own true north, and for you to define that true north and see what, collaborate with your peers to come up with that.
Yeah, Michon, Tom Scheimer, might be Schimmer, I'm not sure. He also talks about when talking about the true north, he talks about teachers who talk about their grading philosophy. They use the word philosophy because it's their own belief. It's not slated or stable in research. So when you're coming up with your true north, consider research as well. Instead of your personal philosophy, what does research say? What are you comfortable with when it comes to the research?
Which is a perfect segue into our last slide. If you are interested in any of things we've said today, number one, like we've said time and time again, email us, okay? We are ready the flood to come in, we'd be happy. Here are also some great resources. The Repair Kit for Grading, 15 Fixes, Grading from the Inside Out, Grading for Equity, and of course, our annotated bibliography. So those are all things that should help your pathway. We'd really like to thank you for joining us today. We are excited, if you can't tell, and passionate about all of these things. Would you like to add anything, Carson, before we go?
No, I'm just excited to be here today with you as well, Michon. So thank you. Thank you to all of you for coming.
Absolutely.
Oh, and thank you to our regional language conference, SWOCULT, or Southwest Cult, for nominating us as best of the Southwest Conference. We truly appreciate your support and getting us here to this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good day.